We'll begin season two with a five-part story. So, first of all, let's go back to what happened last season. As we've already learned that the planet Thundera was about to explode. And just like in the last season, Jaga, along with his band of Thundercats, 12-year-old Dino, Panthro, Chitara, Tigra, and of course the Thunder Kittens and their faithful companion Snarf knew that this was it for Thundera and they knew they had to evacuate. So, with no time to lose, they had to get to the flagship. But the Thundercats knew that they had to hurry. So, anyway, despite a minor setback, that's when the eight Thundercats, that includes Jaga before he passed away, had ran out of the cat slayer. And of course, good news for them, they made it to their flagship just like they did in the last season. But they're not alone because we're about to meet the three Thunderians that they too are trying to evacuate as well. Pumira, Linxo, and Bengali. So there they are now, and they knew that there was no time to waste since one of the ships fell down. So Pumira, Bengali, and Linxo are trying to get to the flagship just like what the others did. So that's what happened. But unfortunately, as Thundera was falling apart, Linxo went blind because of the planet's dust that blinded his eyes. So, Linxo couldn't see a thing. But thankfully, there's good news because Linxo, Pumara, and Bergali just spotted a flagship that's way ahead of them and it's not that far away. So he told Pumara and Bergali to just leave him here, but they refused. So Pumara, being supportive as she is, just told Linxo that there is no way that neither she nor Bengali or either both of them can leave him behind. So they try to hurry to get to the flagship. So what Pumara and Bengali did is that they each grabbed Linxo's arm. And so the three of them are trying to hurry and hope and pray that they make it to the flagship in time. Anyway, speaking of which, meanwhile inside the flagship, there's 12-year-old Lionel and along with Jaga and the rest of the Thundercats saw that there are Thunderians that are trying to reach the flagship. So Jaga, after he learned this from 12-year-old Lionel at that time, that's when he was asking Panther if they could wait a little longer so that the countrymen can board their ship. Then Panther looks at Jaga, his mentor, and also Lionel's mentor. He says that there's just a moment of time, only mere minutes, just before the planet could explode. So Jaga, after he learned this from Panthro, Lionel couldn't believe what he heard. So it's now time for the Thundercats and their flagship to leave, leaving the countrymen behind. So Bengali, Linxo, and Pumara were watching in horror as the flagship was about to leave. And they just couldn't believe what they're about to witness. And they're about to meet their inevitable fate. So while the Thunderians were watching it happen, back on the flagship, 12-year-old Lionel just couldn't believe what they were doing. So he was asking Jaga why they felt it was necessary, and they just couldn't believe what they were doing, leaving the poor countrymen to die and meet their inevitable fate. So Jaga told Lionel, who was 12 at that time, that they had no choice and they had to do whatever's necessary. Jaga also said to Lionel when he was 12 at that time that when he grows up to become the leader of the Thundercats one day, he'll make these tough choices, and this was in fact one of them. And Lionel just couldn't believe what he heard. So as the flagship was leaving, the last thing that Lionel saw was unbelievable. A bunch of planet's flames consuming the countrymen. Or at least that's what he thought. And that's when he realized that he couldn't stand to watch the countrymen die. Then back to the present! In Lionel's room in Cat's lair, that's when he realizes that he just had a nightmare. And that's when his companion Snarf, who saw Lionel was dreaming, he wakes him up. So finally, when Lionel woke up in his room and saw his companion Snarf, and that's when Lionel looked at him and says, "Oh, Snarf, it's you. I just had a nightmare." Or so he thought. So Snarf wants to know, is it about Thundera and its explosion? And Lionel says that it was. "I'll get you some breakfast," Snarf suggested. And so he runs out of Lionel's room. So after Snarf left Lionel's room, Lionel was all by himself in his room, just sitting up in his bed. And as you may have guessed it, he just couldn't help but what's going on in his head and what he experienced as a child. And that he couldn't help but ask himself, are the Thunderians really dead? And of course, that's when the spirit of Jaga shows up. And he told Lionel this unbelievable news. He said, "No, Lionel, the Dundarians that we left behind, unfortunately, they're still alive." Lionel just couldn't believe it. He was blown away and what he heard from Jaga. He says, "What do you mean they're still alive? We saw the planet explode." "Well, that's true," Jaga said. "The planet did explode, but unfortunately, the Thunderians that we thought had died, well, they somehow survived." So after Jaga told Lionel the good news, that's when Lionel says, "You have to tell me where they are." "Well, I'll do better than that," Jaga says. So he suggested to Lionel that there's only one person that could tell them where the Thunderians are. So Jaga told Lionel, "You have to ask Chitara. She'll tell you that." So after that, he disappeared. So Lionel, after he heard from Jaga, he knows that there was no time to lose, so he rushes to the Castlear's council room. So later at the Castlear's council room, Lionel has banded all the Thundercats for a meeting: Chitara, Tigra, Panthro, and the Thunderkins, and he just told them what Jaga said in his room earlier. And so what Lionel did is that he was asking Chitara about the survivors that somehow survived. And so now he's wondering where they are, so he asked Chitara that. So Chitara, after she learned it from Lionel, she didn't hesitate to use her sixth sense, her psychic abilities, of course. So what Chitara is telling Lionel that what happened back on Thundera before it exploded. She said that Linxo, Pumira, and Bengali, the moment that they saw that the flagship had left them behind, they thought that this was it for them, and they decided to have no choice but to meet their deserted fate, or so they thought. That's when Linxo tried to be as supportive as he can be to both Pumira and Bengali that no matter what happens, the code of Thundera will live on forever. Truth, justice, honor, and loyalty. But then suddenly, within the last few minutes, the Robert Berbal flagship has entered Thundera, and the two Berbils that are flying the ship are Rubber Bert and Rubber Bob, and they just saw that there are survivors nearby. So Rubber Bert and Rubber Bob knew that there was no time to lose, so they said that they had to hurry and pick them up. So that's what they did. So back with the Thunderians, they spotted the Robert flagship that's flying nearby. So Rubber Bob told the Thunderians, "Quick, this way, inside the ship, and hurry." So the Thunderians went towards the Robert flagship, and they climbed inside, and good thing they did so. So now that the Thunderians had made it aboard, the first thing they did was to thank the Berbils for rescuing them when they did. So the Berbils were more than happy to introduce themselves to the Thunderians that they rescued earlier, and they came from the planet Robert. Of course, Rubber Bob just told this to Pumira. Then Rubber Bird explained to the Thunderians why now all of a sudden they had to find a new home. It's for them to survive in a way. So then, moments later, before anything could happen, the planet Thundera exploded, just like it did in the last season. Of course, Bengali just told Linxo and Pumara it's a good thing that they got out when they did, thanks to those rubber Berbils. But now here comes the problem, because Rubber Bob just told Rubber Bert that because of the planet's explosion, the flagship's engine has been damaged, and wants to know if there's enough fuel for them to make it to Third Earth. So anyway, back to the present in the Kessler's console room. That's when Chitara said that there's some good news and some bad news. Well, first the good news. The Berbils flagship did take them to Third Earth just the way it's planned with enough fuel in it. Now here comes the bad news. The flagship didn't take them exactly to Berbil village where it's nearby from Catslayer, but however, the five survivors did manage to make it somewhere else. Then Jitar says, "Wait, there's some even better news," because she said there's a small deserted island somewhere on Third Earth, and that's where the five survivors are. But the problem is, she has no idea where it is. Anyway, well, that's because Jitar's visions are gone. So, little did the Thundercats know is that meanwhile at the Black Pyramid's tomb chamber, someone else has heard the news from the Thundercats, and that will be Mumm-ra. And so when he too have heard the good news from the Thundercats in his cauldron, that's when he comes up with a plan. And how, you may ask? Well, he pleaded himself a case to say that he has to reach the five survivors first before the good guys do. But before that can get underway, that's when what Mumm-ra did first was to conjure up his sidekick, Mumm-mutt, to be at his side. So when Mumm-mutt appeared, that's when Mumm-ra decides to send Mumm-mutt to do a favor for him. So Mumm-ra told his sidekick, now pay attention. Here's what you do. So what Mumm-ra did is to send his sidekick to the deserted island where the five survivors were. And then after that, he can report back to Mumm-ra. And so that's what Mumm-mutt did. And so he was sent on his way. So later back at Cat's Lair, this time in the control room, the Thundercats has the same idea to reach the survivors first, but this time they had to do it before the bad guys do. But according to Lionel, there's a bigger problem. There's not a boat that's large enough to take them. And of course, according to Tigra, Thunder Tank doesn't have the range to do it. But Panthro said that there's some good news. There's a couple of vehicles on the list right now that Panthro's working on, which are the Thunderclaw and the Hovercat. So that's four vehicles on the Thundercats vehicles list. So Lionel, after he heard the good news from Panthro that there are two new vehicles on the way and they're almost finished, in the meantime, they have to hurry. So what Lionel did is that he told the Thunder Kittens to go by a nearby fishing village to see if there's a bigger boat that is available. And so the Thunderkins were sent on their way. Back with Mumm-mutt, who's Mumm-ra's psychic that was sent on his way from the Black Pyramid earlier, he's on a mission. Then, what Mumm-mutt saw was an island up ahead, but it's not deserted anymore because, as Chitara said in the council room earlier, there were five survivors there. And when Mumm-mutt saw from below of what is going on in that island with five survivors that are now living in it, he swooped down and flew right past Pumira, Linxo, Bengali, and of course the two Berbils. So when Pumira saw what had happened, she asked Robert Bob, "What was that?" "I'm not sure," Robert Bob said. So after Mumm-mutt had passed the five survivors by, three Dundarians and a couple of Berbils, that's when Pumira asked Linxo a question of what he thought of it, since his senses had been sharp lately, ever since after leaving Thundera, that he'd been blind. But Linxo said he isn't sure of it yet. So, meanwhile, the Berserkers, they were on the ship when they saw Mumm-mutt flying by. The first two that saw Mumm-mutt were Rambam and Top Spinner. The next two were Crusher and, of course, the leader of the Berserkers, Hammerhand. So when the three of the Berserkers, Rambam, Crusher, and Top Spinner, saw that Mumm-mutt was coming back, and so was their leader, Hammerhand, so they decided to move out of the way. The three of them, that is. So when Mumm-mutt landed on their ship, up to this very minute, the Berserkers has ever met Mumm-mutt. So Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, was asking his men to go get rid of Mumm-mutt for him. But then they panicked and hesitated, they being Rambam, Crusher, and of course Top Spinner. So after the three of the Berserkers hesitated, that's when Hammerhand got upset. So Hammerhand, just like what any leader would do, he decides to take matters in his own hands and get rid of Mumm-mutt himself. But he couldn't do it because the moment he stepped closer, Mumm-mutt used his smokescreen on both him, Hammerhand, and of course his men. Then what the Berserker saw next was unbelievable. What Mumm-mutt did is that he projected a hologram of his sidekick, Mumm-ra, to appear on their ship. And when the Berserkers saw it, they just couldn't believe it, and neither did their leader, Hammerhand. He was surprised and in shock. So the first thing that Mumm-ra did after he appeared in front of Hammerhand and his men, he says, "I know why you're afraid of Mumm-mutt, and you have every reason to be." So Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, wants to know from Mumm-ra, "What are you doing here, and why have you come here?" "Well," Mumm-ra explains, "I need a favor from you. There are five survivors in the island just north of here," Mumm-ra explains. "So pay attention, here's the plan," Mumm-ra says. "All you need to do is get to the island and capture five survivors and then bring them to me, alive." So Hammerhead not only agrees to the deal, but he asks the question, "What do we get in return once we do this favor for you?" We can give you a little bit of goodwill on the way, Mumm-ra said, but Hammerhead said in his case that he despised it. He hated it. Even the Berserkers agree with Hammerhand. So Hammerhand had a suggestion. He said that he and his crew would like to be paid, in gold, of course. So after Mumm-ra had thought about Hammerhand's suggestion that he and his crew would be paid instead, so Mumm-ra says, "So be it. Then gold you shall get." So Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, and his men had all agreed to be paid. So Hammerhand said, "Now you're talking. So you know what this means. The Berserker ship is now on its way to do a favor for Mumm-ra." When back on the island with the five survivors, Pumira, Bengali, Linxo, and the two Berbils just saw a ship as coming in their direction, and they thought they were going to be rescued. So Bengali suggested to signal the ship that's coming nearby, but Robert Bob, when Bengali was on his way to signal a ship that's coming that way in that direction, he said, "Wait a minute, I have a bad feeling about this." "What do you mean?" Bengali asked. "Well, the Berbils have given Bengali the bad news. They even said that signaling a ship like that is a bad idea because they suspected that the ship is heading their way right now might be the Berserkers somehow." So Linxo, after he heard the bad news from the Berbils that the Berserkers are heading their way, he told Pumira this suggestion. We should listen to them." So Pumira, after she thought about Linxo's suggestion, that's when she agrees. So, back with the Berserker ship in the middle of the ocean, they are now on their way to the deserted island where the five survivors were. But before they can happen, the Berserkers decided to attack them first. So that's what they did. Back with the five survivors, when they knew they were about to be attacked, that's when Bengali says, "We gotta do something about this. We have to attack these bad guys." And so that's what the five survivors did. So back with the Berserker ship, they were still heading towards the island, attacking it at the same time. While the good guys, meanwhile, still on the island, did the exact same way and tries to attack the Berserkers, hopefully to chase them away, but unfortunately they failed miserably. So by the time that the Berserker ship had made it on the island, the three of the Berserkers, Crusher, Rambam, and Top Spinner, were on their way to evade the island. So that's what they did. But they're not alone because their leader, Hammerhand, does the exact same thing. He got off his ship to join up with his men. So what Hammerhand did is that he asked Rambam to break down the door, and so he did. So after the barricade was broken through, thanks to Rambam of the Berserkers, Pumira, Linxo, and Bengali tries to defend themselves the best way they knew how, by first of all avoiding Crusher of the Berserkers, to instead of have him land head first into the bunch of straw. Unfortunately for the five survivors, after their best efforts had failed, that's when Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, decides to capture all five of them, in which he did, with his net gun. So finally the Berserkers had captured all five of the survivors, and they boarded the Berserker ship, Pumira, Linxo, Bengali, and the two Berbils. So now that everyone has left the island, the Thunderians are now prisoners of the Berserkers. But they're not the only ones, because the Berbils are in the kitchen. They're cooking up for the Berserkers too. So things looked hopeless for the five survivors that were now captured by the Berserkers. Back with the Thunder Kittens who had just left the castle lair earlier, they looked everywhere for every villager in the fishing area to help them out, but no such luck. But that was until suddenly Wily Cat and Wily Kit just saw a berserker ship that's up ahead. So they decided to investigate. So that's what they did. So what the Thunderkins saw was unbelievable. Three of the Thunderians that were on the berserker ship, and watching them were Hammerhand, the leader of the berserkers, and Crusher. And of course, they just couldn't believe what happened. And let's not forget the Berbils are in the kitchen too. Now that the Thunderkins, oh by the way, they're at Plundar Cove. That's where the Berserker ship was. So now that the kittens have found out where the prisoners are and they were held hostage by the Berserkers, that's when they suggested that they should tell the news to the Thundercats back at Cat's Lair. So they went off. So later, back at the Cat's Lair's hangar, there's Panther working on the Thunderclaw and the Hovercat. So when he and of course Snarf, and let's not forget Lino, who were also there, and that's when the Thunderkins came back to tell them the good news. They said that they found the five survivors, but unfortunately they were captured by the Berserkers earlier. But even better, Wily Kid and Wily Cat just told Lionel that they're at Plundar Cove where they just left from. So after Panther heard the news from the Thunder Kittens, he suggested that the prisoners should be rescued. Lionel says, well, not a bad idea, but I got a better suggestion. Why don't you get the Thunderclaw and the Hovercat going first? Then we can meet up later. In the meantime, the Thunderkins can stay here and help you out. Panther agrees with Lionel's suggestion. So, in the meantime, the Thunderkins agree to help out Panthro. And so, Lionel heads off to Plondar Cove. But what he didn't know is that he's not going alone because Snarf is heading off there too. Meanwhile, at Plondar Cove, it was late at night that Lionel was the first to arrive on the scene. He not only saw the Berserker ship, but wait, that's when he knew that what the Thunderkins said was true. There are Thunderians on board. But let's not forget, the Berbils are there too. But that's not all. What Lionel saw was unbelievable. Berserkers. The Thunderkins, what they said is absolutely true. And then Lionel found out that Snarf was there. And so Lionel looked behind him and realizes that he wasn't alone. He was asking Snarf, what are you doing here? Snarf says, well, for two reasons. First of all, I think it'd be a good idea if we waited for the others to arrive. And second of all, I think it's a little dangerous for you to face the Berserkers by yourself. Thanks a lot for your support, Lionel said. Then Lionel says, pay attention, here's the plan. I'll go to the Berserker ship and see if I can try to rescue the hostages. You just wait here. At first, Snarf doesn't think it was a good idea, but he agrees. He says, okay, but you got 5 minutes, and if you're not back here, I'll come back to get you. So, Lionel agrees, and then he heads off. So later, back on the Berserker ship with just Pumira, Bengali, and Linxo, at the moment anyway, that's when Linxo's ears just heard someone swimming under the water. So Pumira was asking if he was okay. I'll be all right, Linxo said. But wait, Linxo's not the only person who heard someone swimming. Rambam of the Berserkers heard it too. Then Rambam of the Berserkers just smelt something good inside the mess hall. Which, speaking of which, that's where the Berbils are cooking up something for them. And of course, Crusher of the Berserkers happens to agree with that. So, both of them went to the mess hall. So, meanwhile, back with Lino, well, good news, he boarded aboard the Berserker ship while everybody else was in the ship's kitchen. The mess hall, that is. Of course, Pumira, Linxo, and Bengali weren't even sure who it was, but then they recognized him as Lionel, the same kid that had just left Thundera since the first season, of course. So now that Pumira, Linxo, and Bengali knew who it was, that's when Lionel says, shh, if you guys be quiet, I'll get you guys out of here. But unfortunately, before Lionel could do that, that's when he was caught in the act by the Berserkers. So Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, says, I thought I've heard something. So Lionel says, really? Now you wished you haven't. So the Berserkers know what to do. They decided to have a battle with Lionel. But before that could get underway, Lionel, as any good guy would do, knows what to do. It was time to call in the cavalry. And by how? By using his sword, of course. And so he projected a Thundercat signal so they can be let know of where Lionel is, the Thundercats that is. So back with Lionel, he is now face to face with Top Spinner, who's up first to defeat him. So after Top Spinner had been tripped by Lionel, it's now Rambam of the Berserker's turn to go face Lionel. But luckily for Lionel, he dodges Rambam's attack. So when Rambam fails to defeat Lionel, it's now Crusher, the Berserker's turn. So while the fight is going on between Lionel and Crusher of the Berserkers, Pumira had told Bengali to do something about it, but he couldn't. So back with Lino and Crusher of the Berserkers, that's when Crusher misses Lino and instead breaks the ship's mast in half. So we know what this means. Now thanks to Crusher, the sail of the ship is however useless. So Lino now goes one-on-one with Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, who got upset. So anyway, after that battle that Lionel had with Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, Lionel couldn't believe what he saw next. Top Spinner, Ram Bam, and Crusher are with the Thunderians. So Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, told Lionel to make your decision. Either you give up, or your friends here will be finished, right before your eyes. What's your decision? But when Lionel doesn't answer, that's when Hammerhand ran to attack him, but Lionel dodges the attack. Before Lionel can leave the Berserker ship, he told the Thunderians, I'll be back for you later, and then after that he dove into the water. So, after Lionel went into the water, that's when Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, told Rambam, in his case, to say, why don't we warm up the water a little bit? So Ram of the Berserkers did what the leader said to do, Hammerhand that is. And of course, with the ship's fireball cannon, he started shooting into the water, Ram of the Berserkers to be exact. Back in the water, Lionel tries to make it to shore as best as he possibly could. And then before you know it, back with Snarf, he's still waiting for his companion Lionel to come back. So long story short, when Snarf couldn't stand to see Lionel suffer like this, he says, hang on, I'm coming. But when he dove into the water, or tried to, that's when Snarf realizes that the water's so hot that he couldn't do a thing about it. Back on the Berserker ship, Hammerhand, the leader of the Berserkers, he was laughing with pure delight, thinking that this will be the last they ever see of him, they being the Berserkers, that is. Back with Lionel, who is struggling to keep afloat the water, but things are looking bad for him. Will Lionel be rescued in time by his friends, or to coin a phrase, be boiled to death? We'll find out for sure. But right now, this is the end of episode 1 and part 1.